to always, you could tell I was dedicated as much time as I could to the activities of the youth volunteers in the World Center. It was always, I got more out of it, I think, than they did, but that was wonderful. This period of our life is one of course, of transition. Some of us are discovering the faith and gradually coming to understand the implications of it. Others have been born in Baha'i families and we're really Baha'is because we're Baha'izadehs, we're the children of Baha'is. And others are beginning to go through the transition of moving from a child of a Baha'i to forming their own independent relationship with Baha'u'llah and understanding what that means, which is what we all have to come to. So even though some have had the good fortune of being raised as Baha'is, they now have to raise themselves as Baha'is. Now that's a challenge, a special challenge. Some of the youth rebel at that point. I know in the Holy Land there were youth that came, they were pretty raw. I mean, they weren't very well experienced and they hadn't read much about the faith, and they had to come to grips with that they'd come there and this going to have this period of time to dedicate to service, and they needed to have the right attitude towards it. And gradually that awoke. There's a very special bounty there of being able to visit the shrines. So you can take yourself and all your shortcomings there and say prayers and think about how I'm going to try to improve myself, and then think about that the next time you go again, and then think about it the next time you go again, because we don't seem to have the capacity to improve ourselves. It's this subtle thing. Abdu'l-Baha says that God sends us the same tests over and over again. And each time we think, okay God, I'm gonna take care of this. I'm gonna stop doing whatever it is that I shouldn't be doing. And then here I am again. I don't know what happened. I couldn't, and I didn't. And here we are again. I couldn't and I didn't, until we begin to get a sense of our own powerlessness. We have the challenge, the opening verses of the Most Holy Book prescribe two duties to all of us. The first duty is to recognize the manifestation of God. And of course, the recognition of the manifestation of God is not just to say, well, okay, I'm going to follow Baha'u'llah, but to try to gain some concept of what is a manifestation of God. And that naturally takes time. I've seen a letter of Shoghi Effendi. He says it takes years to become a Baha'i. It seems like one little act and we're finished, but it takes years. That's the first duty. Then the second duty, he says, is to observe strictly, puts a very interesting word there, strictly observe all the laws and ordinances that Baha'u'llah ordains in the Kitab-i-Aqdah. So there we are. And then we have the challenge of trying to do that. Abdu'l-Baha says that test comes back until we get desperate, that I don't know how I'm going to ever change myself. I'm trying, but it doesn't work. And then finally, he says, we throw ourselves on God's mercy. In our own minds, there's a very important turning point in which we say, I can't do this. Only you can do this. Will you do it? Will you help me? And then Abdu'l-Baha says, the test comes again, and it's gone. Well, right behind it is the next test. So constantly we're struggling, and it's not popular culture to say you have to humiliate yourself before God and say, look, I'm powerless, hopeless, and helpless, and I need some help to take care of these extra activities of mine that I shouldn't be engaged in, or the way I think about people. Shoghi Effendi mentions, echoing the Master, that we have to be careful that we don't think negatively about each other. It doesn't mean that there are not grounds and reasons for thinking negatively about each other. This Baha'i friend of mine insulted me. This Baha'i friend of mine spoke badly about my mother. I have every grounds to be grumpy and upset. But that grumpy and upset doesn't solve anything. And it deprives us of a lucid, open connection with Baha'u'llah, because we're disobeying him when we think negatively about others. And Chogi Effendi says, the dark forces in life, and the dark forces are the animal aspects, the selfishness, the disagreement, the anger we have at things around us that we don't go our way. How do we overcome that? And he says, be careful lest the dark forces enter your life by thinking and feeling negatively about others. So I looked at that the first time I saw this letter. I thought, my goodness, wait a second here. He's saying thinking and feeling. He's not saying talking and saying openly that you don't like anything. You've got it hidden inside yourself. We might be being hypocrites. We're smiling at the people that we don't like. My wife, she's got some very interesting spiritual ideas, and she says, if somebody's bothering you, and you can't seem to cheer them up, and they just ignore you, or they act rudely towards you, she said, pray for them. If you pray for them, it's an act of grace and mercy on your part, because you're not really wanting to pray for them, but you need to solve this relationship that we have with others. And she said that she found in her experience that when she did that, the situation would change. After a while, the person couldn't really be mean to you anymore. Somehow something was happening in an unseen way that resolved that. And at least it relaxed enough so you could go on living, because it's hard when people are being hurtful to us. Naturally, is part of life that's difficult. And why is all this so important? Because Chogi Effendi says, unless the Baha'is are united and love each other, there will be no attraction to the rest of the people to come to us. And we don't explore the bounties of that unity and that love. We miss out on it. And when we miss out on it, our lives they're negative and they're miserable, and we are not happy, and we're upset with the Baha'i activity, or this one, why did they do that or didn't do that? It's going beyond the shortcomings. It's not that we don't all have shortcomings to be seen, we do. But rising above it, Abdul says, for the sake of your Lord, you overlook all those things. And you ask that you have a sin-covering eye, that you don't see people's shortcomings. We're close to each other. We may see the mistakes that somebody's making around us, but are we going to condemn them in our minds when our own shortcomings are much more evident to God perhaps than this other person's? We don't know. We can't tell. Bill Sears used to say, we are only judged in our lives. Our actions are only judged in accordance with what we've been given. So God gives us different capacities. We see in our own brothers and sisters different levels of capacity. Or if you're parents, you see your children have different. Some are very bright in one area, some expressions. Why is this? This is because Abdu'l-Baha explains in a very meaningful passage in the tablet that he revealed at Baha'u'llah's request when he was 14 years old to one of the sheikhs in Baghdad that had asked a question of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah said, this is a question that Agha should answer. And this really was the first major tablet that he wrote, an extraordinary tablet, 30, 40 pages of mystical explanations that you can follow it. And it trains you. As he gets to the end of it, there are passages. This is going to be published within the next couple of years. You can read it in Persian and Arabic if you'd like, if you have that capacity. I don't have it, but somebody explained these things to me, so it's helpful. They asked, one of the questions that was posed to the Master, to Abdu'l-Baha, was why these great seers and visionaries, spiritual visionaries, the mystic leaders, why they have different interpretations of the same verses. Why do they emphasize? One says, about the closeness of God, and one is always talking about the remoteness of God, and so why can't they get themselves together if it's the same truth? Abdu'l-Baha says that we all have the spectrum of all the names and attributes of all the powers of God that you read at the end of the prayers. He's the all-seeing, the knowing, the merciful, the compassionate. We all have the capacity to reflect those names. But everyone, he says, each person has been endowed with a different set of those. And that's what gives us each a uniqueness, so that we're also the reflection of God, the unique, the one. Because the set of qualities and things that he has implanted in our reality, in our spiritual reality, and if we follow faithfully the first verse of the Akdas, which is recognize the manifestation and obey his laws, gradually comes to fruition. That, he says, has one name of God that's stamped on each individual. That's the dominant name of God in their character. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, which one is it that I have? Or you're saying, well, I can't imagine that I have any. Well, you do. You have. And sometimes, the name of God, the wise, or the all-knowing, or the perceptive may be animating this particular individual. And we think, oh, that's wonderful. But here's this lady over here that maybe she can't read, but her dominant name of God is the compassionate, the tender. And she's the big mama that hugs us all when we feel bad. And that's her role. We all have different roles to play. And it's through prayer and through trying, making efforts and failing and asking the God's assistance that I think that the maturity of vision and the gradual increasing closeness with God takes place. Now, friends, hopeless to try to do the 5-year plan unless that plan, as I understand it, that plan has to be our first plan, drawing close to God. If that's not the center of our consciousness, if our consciousness is, I wonder if I'm going to be free this weekend to go do this, and I'll see so-and-so, and that's all right, that's there, but it has to be at a secondary level. Abdu'l-Baha has said once, in a marriage, if one person loves the other partner more than they love God, it messes with the marriage. It doesn't go forward well. Implying that the first love we must have, and remember this from the hidden words, I desire to be loved alone and above all that is. It's that connection that heals us of all the shortcomings and makes us incarnate spirit. It makes us the things Abdu'l-Baha says, you want to teach the divine plan, he says you must become incarnate spirit. You must be consciously aware of this confirmation that comes from God and shine with that, and that attracts other people. If you do that, these days we call it living the life. Shoghi talks about living the life, living the Baha'i life. He says in one letter, if you live the Baha'i life, Baha'u'llah will send souls to you. Easier than knocking on doors, friends. Much easier. But it requires us to be alive with Baha'i life, with the need to change and transform ourselves. And the exciting thing is we don't know what that looks like. I mean, as it's happening, we take on qualities and dimensions of service and possibilities of helping others that we didn't dream we had. Because we have this terrific resource. The other thing, okay, who's the manifestation of God? Baha'u'llah says in the Book of Certitude, as I understand, he says that all things live and move and have their being in the manifestation of God. Abdu'l-Baha says if it were not for the blessings of the Holy Spirit, you would be unconscious. You would have no consciousness. That's something that's flowing from the invisible spiritual world and endows us with the capacity to reason and think. We have this free will in ourselves that we can choose to think in negative ways or we can think positive ways. Every day we're making this switching, looking. Each thing that presents itself to us, do we conform to the teachings or do we conform to our self-love and our own interests? It's very challenging. But if we don't get to a stage where we're doing that, we don't make much progress. Oh, God is merciful. He has endless bounties and evidently, I can tell you from personal experience, endless patience with our shortcomings. In fact, he says that he is the ever-forgiving, the all-forgiving, the most forgiving. I don't think you can come up with something he can't deal with. You may not think you can deal with it, and you may paralyze yourself. You say, because I've done this, I'm unworthy, I can't go on. No, Frank. If you fall down, the law is get up again. Ask his favor and get up. And if we don't do that, we'll all stop. Because we always have something that we don't feel, good about ourselves. In fact, not feeling good about yourself is a sign of progress, Abdu'l-Baha says. If you're self-satisfied and think I'm doing pretty well, I look at the other Baha'is and I've been doing a lot. I push myself in ways I see they don't push themselves. I'm sure I must be in a good position. That's all very good, but you can't compare yourself with anybody else because you don't know what your own blood count is. You don't know what favors God has placed within you. And those are different from one to the other. So Bill Sears, the hand of the cause, used to say, there's these two guys. One of them has the capacity to count to 20, and the other has been given the capacity from God. Obviously, this is symbolic. To count to 100. Well, the guy that can count to 100, what a terrific capacity that is, compared to the guy who can count to 20. But the guy who can count to 20 has learned to 100, has learned how to count to 35, 36. And he's looking at the guy that can count to 20, and the guy who counts to 20 has learned to count to 19. And the guy at 36, he's looking back. Instead of looking up where he should be, he's looking back down and saying, wow, I'm a whole lot better off than he is. No. You've got a long way to go to 100, buddy. You better get working, thinking about that, So there's nobody we can compare ourselves with except the Master. That's the only Savior. And then we're always in a deficit. We're always thinking, I have to do more, And why it's good to read about Abdu'l-Baha and what his life was and how he served people and so on. So we're immersed. Baha'u'llah says, I'm closer to you than your jugular vein, than your life vein. That's this vein here. You cut that and everything stops. He's right there with us. We can always turn to him. In the prayers it says, I ask of thee by thy name to assist me to do this and that. You read a few of the more prayers and prayers and meditations, and he says, I beg of thee by he who is thy name. In other words, Baha'u'llah doesn't put himself there as a person. He reduces the vision of himself by calling himself the name of God. I beseech thee by thy name to help me to do this and accomplish this and that. We're always turning to Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi says we can pray to God or to Baha'u'llah. We can do both. In a letter, he says. But it's better if we pray through Baha'u'llah. To Baha'u'llah, but through Baha'u'llah, because directly to God, nobody has the capacity to imagine what God is. But we do have the capacity to imagine and understand Baha'u'llah. First of all, as a human being, and then that which flows through him, the power of God that flows through him. Do we realize that the manifestation of God is not a human being? He has elements of human being, but he has another element, which is this universal mind. Abdu'l-Baha makes a very interesting example. He says that we have, in our station as human beings, we have consciousness of our whole physical being. Our big toe hurts, we know it. We're too warm, we know it. We've got knowledge, immediate knowledge. We don't have to study about it. It's just right there with us. Okay. He says, likewise, the manifestation of God has this, but he has another consciousness in which every one of us is a cell of his spiritual being. We are all fish within the ocean of Baha'u'llah. He knows our conditions. He knows our needs, and he's constantly addressing them, despite our thinking we're abandoned and by ourselves. He's got a program for us. He's working for us. But knowing, gaining through, I think particularly helpful, the hidden words. Reading daily the hidden words, as Abdul Baha says. Read the hidden words morning and evening. Reflect on them. He says, if you're assisted by God to live one hidden word, you will have lived all of them. They're that closely connected, you know. So pick an easy one to start. Then he goes on, he says, memorize the friendship, memorize the hidden word. There was a very outstanding Baha'i woman, a teacher of the faith. She lived in Portland. She was involved with university work, but she lectured all over the world in universities in the 30s and in the 40s. Her name was Helen Bishop. Shoghi Effendi invited her to write an introduction to the Igan for the West. Imagine, of all the Baha'is in the world, this lady wrote this beautiful introduction about the nature of the manifestation. Some of the things we're talking about tonight are there. And she was going on pilgrimage. She tells this story about herself. She said, I was going on pilgrimage, so she said, oh, now I'm going to meet Shoghi Effendi. I've got to think up some good questions. But she was thinking about the good questions to impress Shoghi Effendi. What questions could I ask? Not that she knew the answers, but that would make him say, whoa, what deep questions. So she said she came to the Holy Land with that, and she had her list of questions on. And she came downstairs, and the guardian greeted her so warmly and asked her to sit next to him. And the other pilgrims came, and the latest pilgrim always sat the closest to the guardian. And then he said after I was seated, he began engaging with everybody at the table, one at a time, this and that, and questions and so on, and smiling, and he never looked at me. She says, I was about a half an hour cooking like that, you know, thinking, why? And then she started thinking on the nature of her questions. And it dawned on her that she was coming, filled with pride about her important questions she was going to ask. And she said, as soon as she thought that and realized the error of it, Shoghi Effendi turned to her with a big smile and he said, and Mrs. Bishop, he said, you must have some questions. At which point she couldn't remember any of them. But she said the second night I remembered one of them, which I really wanted to know the answer to, is how can I improve my teaching work? You know, the teaching I'm going, what? Do you have a suggestion? What? And she said, I never could have guessed what he was going to say. And he said, Mrs. Bishop, you should memorize the hidden words so that the traces of those truths will lace together into your talks and into your conversations, meaningful conversations with others that we're all trying to figure out how to do. Now, dear Kaleem wants this to be related to arising to teach, to volunteer, to give time. He's got some divine pressures from above pushing him to get the Baha'is to arise and volunteer their time and do things. And I hope I'm not ignoring that by talking about these other subjects, because I think these other subjects are the things that motivate us to think, maybe I better be serving more, maybe I better be sacrificing. I do what I can. Shoghi Effendi said the engine of the cause is fueled by sacrifice. When the Baha'is sacrifice, the work moves forward. When we do what we're able to do, it stays as it is. It maintains itself. We all live in communities that don't seem to grow sometimes. What is it that has to happen? Significantly, Shoghi Effendi has, in a letter written, he talks about this sacrifice and the importance of it. And he talks about 3 areas of sacrifice, he said, that the friends have to think about if the cause is to grow. That's sacrifice, first, he said, in the area of finance. Sacrifice in contributing financially to the work of the faith. That's a fairly easy one. You can look at that and you can give more or not give more. The second one, he said, is more challenging, and that is the sacrifice of time. We have only so much money. We have to decide how we can help the cause, to what degree we can do that. Time is another thing. We've got time. What do we want? We have to remove ourselves from using time selfishly. You know? Well, I'm not going to give up the NBA games, that's for sure. You know, and I do have my dance class or my yoga class, and I have to do that. And I've got to groom my horse, and I've got this thing, you know. I mean, I have responsibilities. I don't really have any time to sacrifice for the weekend or for the service of the cause. Somehow we have to figure out what we're going to give up, and that's sacrifice. Sacrifice usually hurts a little bit. It feels difficult. But if we can get ourselves to do that, it brings terrific bounties, and it energizes the work of the faith. All right, we've gotten 2 now. There's a third one. He says that's the sacrifice. You've got it. You've got money. You've got time. The third one, he says, is person. The sacrifice of your person. What? You want me to give up my life goals? But I want to be a professor of such and such, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And I need to take these extra courses in school. Or maybe you're meaning I shouldn't read comic books or play games. No, nobody wants you to be fanatic, you know. But maybe not quite so many. Some of those things we have to pull back a little bit from. And how can we use our person, our life's goals? That I wanted to travel to this, or I have my summer holiday gift, or it's all planned to go to Spain. I shouldn't do that? I don't know whether you should do it or not, but you have to ask yourself these things along the way. How essential are these? Are they more important than the goals that are being derived from the divine plan and that I have a chance to participate in? And do you know what it means to your own development spiritually if money, time, and person are offered to the cause? Those are not impossible things, obviously, you know. And the time we have to spend with our relatives, the time we have to take care of our parents or ailing friends or something, all these things, it all is in a balance. But where are you going to find the little extras to do in those areas that will help the cause move forward? And those are the questions you have to ask yourself. And I don't think that we're going to ask ourselves those questions unless we start to pulse with the spiritual meaning of existence and with trying to see how we can grow into what God wants us to become. Shoghi Effendi, the last year of his life, he spoke about essential steps to effective service. Emphasis on the word effective. We can be busy in the cause, we can use our time and our person and our money and still not get it right. He says effective service, there are 4 steps to it. prayer, meditation, study of the writings, and action. These prayer, meditation, and study of the writings are appropriate action for the inner life. And when the inner life is animated through those steps, which are regular and part of the habit of our lives, then the action becomes effective. Then we gain people's confidence, and our words can penetrate their hearts and cause a change. Another one of this kind of clues that I found along the way was an interview of a woman, Alice Rideout was her name, Anis Rideout, I guess. And she asked Abdu'l-Baha, how can I better teach the cause? And Abdu'l-Baha said 3 times, very forcefully, he said, you must live the life. Live the life. Live the life. And he said, in order to live the life, you have to acquire thirst for spirituality. You have to want to become spiritual. How is that going to happen? He said the source to start that is to read about life after death. Read the tablets and teachings in the Holy Writings about immortality, about what is eternal life, about the life that we lead after we die. Why would that be such a cause for awakening spirituality? I think it's because we get, you will maybe have your own ideas about this, but to me it looks like because we get an idea that an awful lot depends on what we do in this life, what's going to happen to us when we die. Now when we're young we don't think, well, I'm not going to die right away. And I'm 80 now, so I'm beginning to think about these things, a little bit more. I've been telling people I was going to write a book about immortality. I just told the local assembly, they asked me about it. I said, I'm planning to write it after I die so that I get it right. And one of the ladies said, I'm dying to read your book. Okay, he says, once you study, and this is a fairly intensive study to read the various tablets and writings about the subject. Once you do that, once you get to that stage, he said, then you'll see this thirst for spirituality awakens. And when the thirst for spirituality awakens in us, then we want to live the life. And living the life means, of course, trying to conform ourselves to the teachings, trying to follow the pattern of Baha'i life that's set forth in the writings. And when that pattern is there, he said, then you'll be able to live the life. And living the life, you'll effectively teach the cause. So, quality in teaching and not just quantity is what we're after. Prayer, meditation, and study are all internal, individual things. You get a lot of it with the Ruhi books, you get various aspects of it, but you need to have an individual program of your own to think what's I'm attracted to, what should I be reading and studying, what's my plan for how much do I pray, what are the best times of day to pray, do I need to have a regular practice of this, do I always remember the obligatory prayers? Abdu'l-Baha in a tablet, he says that there are 2 valid reasons for not saying the obligatory prayer. One is that you're too sick to get out of bed and you're sick and you can't function. God forgives that. The other, he says, is mental illness, insanity. If you forget your prayers, which one are you going to choose? Those 2. He doesn't give us much wiggle room. This is essential. So that's an aspect of prayer. Then he says meditation and prayer are 2 different actions. One is reciting the verses of God, praying using the revealed writings. Another is meditating, thinking about it. And he connects it always with the verses. Pondering, reflecting, meditating, thinking about the meaning of what you've read. What are the meanings? I said this prayer, what does it mean? Have I thought about the meanings? Have I looked at it again? Have I not just voiced it, but actually worked with it and tried to draw some of the healing waters from it and so on? And then study of the writings, it says, okay, we have to painstakingly study the whole range of Baha'i literature, particularly the original writings. Major challenge that we have in that. He talks about reading, rereading, painstakingly studying, digesting the contents of it. That's a kind of careful study and making notes and things about what you read. Then mastering the content of books like the Gone and Some Answered Questions and the Dawnbreakers. Obviously, reading a few verses morning and evening doesn't fulfill that requirement. We are told in the Aktas to read morning and evening so that our souls will be uplifted. Read a few verses in the morning, your soul is awakened. It lifts. But now we need to study the content of not only the Baha'i faith, but the challenge that we have now with Islam. We're supposed to vindicate Islam in the eyes of the West. The Baha'i community, in the long run, is going to have to do that. Because everybody's going to hate Islam except Muslims. In fact, a lot of Muslims are beginning to hate it too because of the distortions. How are we going to vindicate it? How are we going to show its rightness and goodness? And of course it has to be within a progressive revelation. We're not teaching people to become Muslims. We're teaching what is the role of Islam in the course of human history. I'm going on a long time. That's good. You want to talk about the goals of the weekends and things like that? I think, Friends, yeah, but I think there should maybe an opportunity. You might want to say things yourselves, ask something. You may want to ask Kaleem or something about what the monetary needs are, what the needs of time are, what the needs of person are. Thank you.
Maybe somebody has any questions for Mr. Dunbar?
Oh, I do. Sorry, I didn't think that. I have a question. I hear a lot of times people talk about it's so much harder to be a Baha'i now, and there's so much going on in the world that it's so much more difficult. Is there anywhere in the writings where it says that it gets harder because of the tests of the world getting harder, or are we just growing up and noticing things we didn't notice when we were younger? Does that am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's harder. It's that we're becoming more aware of the challenges that we may have been a little sleepy before, and now we're waking up and realizing it's a tough business. Personal transformation is a tough business. And you could say, well, that's very selfish to take time to just, work on yourself and improve yourself. But that's so essential to this question of plans. And the closer you are to God, Shoghi Effendi told May Maxwell, the more mysterious your actions. And the more mysterious you will find the circumstances around you, because God uses you. Allah can use you. But He can't use you if you have your own plan that you don't let Him interfere in. That's, again, free choice of what we have. Not worse, it's difficult. Maybe I hope we're understanding how difficult it is. I think that's a help for us all. So some I see, they hear things that some of the Baha'is are thinking we should do something, about politics and getting into politics. Shoghi Effendi says the old world order, he says, is going to disintegrate. The new world order, he says, is going to be built on the ashes of the old world order. well, why are we trying to fix something that's going to end up as ashes? You know, we can't fix it because it's filled with people who have all the wrong motivations. They have self and passion as the animating force in their life. Maybe some of them have some altruism, but most of them are looking to take advantage of the political system for their own well-being. Look at history. If you don't want to look at politics, don't have. Shoghi Effendi read the newspaper every day. He doesn't. We're not supposed to be idiots about politics. Oh, we shouldn't be concerned with politics. No, we shouldn't be trying to fix them. We shouldn't be commenting about it. We shouldn't be, but that we should be astute in our own minds about what's going on in the world. Because we can see how relevant Baha'u'llah's teachings are to solving it. So I think the house keeps talking about that, and the whole Institute of Global Prosperity business is all involved in trying to see how we can apply the teachings to the problems that we're facing. But let's not imagine we can fix everything by social action. But by social action we look responsible, at least we look like we're alive in the world, and that's part of what's going on.
I have a question about meditation. It's a little bit different, but something that I suppose I'm still trying to learn how to do is to actually meditate effectively. Because you read about Abdu'l-Baha meditating for hours every day, and yet I struggle with like 10 minutes of it. Other than the guided meditation, for example, from Kathy Grammer, and all these different things that, or you find on YouTube guided meditation, but then they walk you through different things. But in terms of the actual practice of meditation, that's something that I still find myself wanting to understand more. I wonder if you could share anything about that.
The letters that I've seen of the Guardian, he says that we should be free to choose the form of meditation that we're comfortable with. But he says in another letter, rather than choose some form of meditation other than the writings, is it really rewarding, in the sense that we meditate on the teachings. And even when, we've said a prayer afterwards, some verse in that prayer will come to our minds. I mean, we won't necessarily have a fixed time that we meditate. We may be meditating all the time. And finally we get on the bus or on the train or in the car and we're thinking about what we read this morning. So the meditation is a reflective act that's going on constantly in our lives, I think. And certainly the idea that Baha'i meditation means emptying ourselves of all thoughts, and concentrating on our navels or something. There's nothing in the writings that say that that's what meditation is. And that's a confusion a bit because of the certain Buddhist practices and so on. And why doesn't Baha'u'llah quote Buddha in his revelation? The Guardian says because we have no authentic teachings left. They've all been adulterated by the priests. So some of the concepts of meditation, and the yoga emptiness and stuff may not be particularly beneficial to us. Maybe, but again, he says no strictness about it. We don't have a Baha'i method of meditation. You can evolve the one that works for you. But how many parts of the Igan, it says, reflect on this, O people. Consider what this action or that development or something. Or ponder this. All these verbs are driving us to thinking, which is thinking about the teachings, which is meditation as far as I understand. Did you catch in the references that the Guardian made? These are essential These 4 steps lead to success. Not 3 of them, not 2 of them, all 4 of them. He says, if we don't act on what we learn, then it comes to nothing. And the thing that he stresses about acting is perseverance. Sticking to it, trying to do it, practicing it, trying to do it, sticking to it. There was so much stress on perseverance in the crusade that Bill Sears created a cartoon to help the friends think about it. And the cartoon showed a desert island about the size of these 2 blankets here, with a palm tree in the middle of it. And a couple, a man and a woman, bedraggled in rags, standing in the water, at the edge of the water. They just pulled a bottle out of the water, and it had a message in the water and in the bottle, and they pulled the message out, and they were unrolling the message and reading the message, and the message said, "Persevere, Shogi." And instead the guardian saw it and laughed himself when he saw this cartoon. But it's just like that. It's really dogged perseverance. Shogi Effendi joked one time, he said, the Virgin Territories, when the pioneers went, the Knights of Baha'u'llah, they opened these new territories. They were opened. They were no longer Virgin Territories. So he said one time, it would be a pity if the territories lapsed back into virginity. One night he was discussing what he was going to call the heroes of the faith and the heroines of the faith that were going to go out and open these territories, It was not something already decided about knights, but then he had mentioned, he said, I'm thinking of calling them knights. Now, we've got a history of that. We have the list of the knights in the Baha'i world books, and we've got a terrific scroll that has inscribed in the guardian's own handwriting the names of all these territories and the people who settled them. Some of them Texan housewives opening islands off the coasts of Africa. They don't know a word of the languages of those places, but somehow they prevailed. So Shogi Effendi said, I'm thinking of calling them knights. And this was at the pilgrim table. And Raya Khanum said, Shogi Effendi, what are you going to name the women? Knighties? And the people at the table said Shogi Effendi didn't skip a breath. He didn't look at her, he didn't smile, he just went on with his explanation.
So Dunbar, you talked about the importance of meditating on life after death, and I know that's an area that you've been exploring quite a bit lately. Is there anything you would want to share on that?
Well, considering Islam, considering some of the hadiths and traditions of Islam, considering Abdul Baha's tablets and commentaries and explanations, you have a woman who's just lost a young baby, a little girl, and how sad she was. And the Master saying she should overcome her sadness. That this child is now in the kingdom and will be educated properly in the schools of the kingdom. And out of those schools she will grow a fully mature woman, and you'll meet her when you pass away. Now, the other teaching of Abdu'l-Baha that I think has a lot of meaning, though we can't penetrate and understand the conditions of the next world, yet he says everything in this world is in that world first. The realities are spiritual realities. Other than that, there wouldn't be any Anna or Douglas or Shireen or anything. There wouldn't be anything. It starts there. Everything starts there. That the soul is introduced into matter And the soul animates the matter and creates, because there's parts of the soul that you don't control. For instance, you don't control the saliva in your mouth, the blood circulating in your system, the creation of new blood. These are powers of the soul which maintain the human body. The senses are all spiritual realities. They disappear when the soul removes itself. All those senses disappear from the body. We have all kinds of references in the writings that we tend to just say, well, it's something symbolic. Abdu'l-Baha himself testifies, he said, I had a dream of one of the hands of the cause, and we saw him and he was corpulent, fairly hefty man. He said he was still hefty in the other world. And he was very happy and jovial, and I saw him and he said he had been traveling and diffusing the fragrances of God in the realms on high. And he was very pleased because he'd found new food there, new fruits and things to eat. Some of the near-death experiences, the people came back, they said they didn't realize they were dead. The sudden death, the very sudden death, sometimes the person's in the next world, he doesn't realize. Because he's got relatives, he's got scenes, he's got cities, he's got a university that's mentioned there. That one master told Howard Colby Ives he wanted to make him a professor in the University of the Kingdom. What are these things? I mean, in other words, I just say this not to be able to say I don't know how the reality of it is, but don't imagine you're going to be sitting on a cloud of pink cotton candy strumming on a ukulele. It's not the picture of the next world that I get, anyway. And it's just a comic version of nonsense, you know. I met an older Persian in New Zealand last year. He said 3 of us had been pioneering 20, 30 years, Persians in the Pacific. Sacrificed a lot. And he said, we knew we were going to die before too long, so he made a pact. Whoever goes over first sends a message and tells the others what it's like. And he said, last year one of the 3 died. So they were wondering, is it possible that they could possibly? And the other one, the 3rd fellow, had a dream. And he saw the one who died. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm not permitted to speak about the realities of that world. All I can tell you is, it's very busy. Oh. Interesting, because we're all thinking the eternal rest, I'm going to get in my hammock and nobody's going to push me about goals and I'll just be fine. No. But anything you have here, you're going to have the perfection of it in that world. All the arts and crafts exist there. They're there and channeled into receptive souls here when God gets ready. When Baha'u'llah says it's time for a new invention, it appears. Strange, look at the history. Suddenly you've got 6, 7 countries claiming they invented the airplane, they invented the telephone. You say, what, they're lying. It can't be because they invented it here in America. But the Russians have the same thing, and the Ukrainians have the same thing. It's part of those minds that are trying to understand a certain reality of science are suddenly confirmed all at the same time. Baha'u'llah in the Loy Hikmat, he says, we give the sciences and we take them away. We gave high knowledge to the Greeks, and they were the highest of that expression in the world, he says. And then we removed it from them. Now, we're going to get all prideful because we invented something. It's channeled to us. They're so immediate. Baha'u'llah says we have angels and spirits taking care of us immediately. One level of spirits, he said that they said there's different grades of spirits in the next world. They asked him in a tablet about it. He says that that there are various levels, they have various activities. He said one category of them are those souls that are assigned to each of the people on the planet Earth and are noting down everything they think and say and do. That's every note, they take every detail. So in the end, when you have the account of your life is repeated to you, you have that experience, you really make the judgment whether you did it or not the right way. His grace is all-encompassing, but you yourself, Ryokanno said she thought that the worst punishment in the next world would be the realization of your own, the regrets you would have about the missed opportunities that you had before you that you didn't realize were important and didn't take, or were tired, or were lazy. And I think that's probably going to bother us, you know. Moments we saw we could have done something. So studying about it, reading about it, if you will, creates a taste, you know, like, I better behave myself or I'm not going to be in very good condition. And that's no references to hell. You hear in the Baha'i community that we don't believe in hell. Nonsense. Nonsense. Have you read the Loy Fuad, I think it is, in the one of the tablets of Baha'u'llah that's published in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts? One of these ministers who didn't refrain and regret what he did to Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah says he passed away, and as he was passing, he was begging. He was saying, I have a lovely house on the Bosphorus, I'll give it to you. I'll get the streams flow down, it's a beautiful place, please. No excuses, he said. The avenging angels of hell have opened the doors of hell to swallow you up. Now, you don't want to get in that kind of position, obviously, but there are punishments. Nasruddin Shah, when he died, Shoyibindi said he went straight to hell. And Mr. Olinga says, I heard him say that, and then he turned to me and he said, he's still there. So, which also implies that it's not a permanent condition. You know, the punishment is like a loving father that disciplines the child, tries to break them of this self-love and of this negation of God and the negation of the Holy Spirit. He says those are the sins that are not forgiven because it requires the individual still has to turn in the right direction to begin the healing process. Otherwise they live in their own vain imaginings and there's no chance. And you want to be sure you don't get caught in that kind of a trend. But you're believers, you. Oh, Muhammad in the Quran is an authentic holy book. He says, do you think we're joking with you when we say these things? When I say to you that God said to me, Gabriel said to me to tell you to do this, and then you listen and you say, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, that brings punishment. God's the Lord of the universe. He's telling us what to do. He didn't make ourselves. I was mentioning in this in another meeting recently that Abdul has said in a tablet that suicide is tantamount to murder. Why is it tantamount to murder? To kill yourself. Because you don't belong to yourself. You didn't make yourself. God made you. He's created you. He's sustaining you. If you take your own life, it's like taking another soul's life. That's pretty grave business. I mention that because sometimes it's good medicine to tell somebody who's feeling suicidal that, you know, really, you don't have rights on that. You better be patient and long-suffering. In a quieter moment, they asked the guardian about suicide. He said, suicide is like arriving at a banquet uninvited. Uh-oh. What am I doing here? And everybody else is asking what you're doing there too. So. It all has its timing. Nothing no death, no timing that is without the permission of God. It says it's clearly in the writings. It doesn't mean that sometimes he doesn't permit accidental deaths, because there are accidental deaths. He said there's so much oil in the human life, he's given, it's like a lamp that has that much oil. When the oil finishes, there's no possibility of, that's it, it's finished. But he said this wind may come along and knock the lamp over and put it out. And he counsels us to be wise and to be prudent and to be careful. And martyrdom is a great station, but you're not supposed to go and provoke it. That's another question. Is that enough about life after death?
Can I ask one more question?
Please, yeah, sorry.
I have two questions actually. One is you referred to dreams, and it made me think. I just wonder, is there anything you've read or any indication that there is some reason for this? That and I think I'm not alone in this, that whenever I dream about my loved ones who have passed, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, they always appear so much younger and really vibrant and full of energy and just so, so alive. And every time that has happened, until recent, and of course, they were much older women in the past. And then recently, I had a dream where one of them appeared, much older and a little disheveled, and it haunts me. And it just made me so sad. And I just wondered, is there any logic to this? I mean, I know that others have said that they also see their loved ones, their grandparents as younger in their dreams as well. And it kind of, to me, I always thought that it's, a reflection of the joy of their spirit, where they are. So that's one question. And then the other question, if you'll permit me, is you mentioned these near-death experiences. And I know that for many years we've heard about this, and I've been a bit, it's hard for me to grasp this concept, and I'm a little skeptical when I hear about that, but I've been thinking about it more and more lately. So I just wonder, are there any sort of stories that you find to be credible yourself, that if one were interested to read about?
Yes. Well, starting with the second one, I think there's a lot of these accounts, and there are now people, there's a Professor Lommel in Belgium, or maybe in the Netherlands, who's head of a hospital and has been documenting everything he can from all over the world, these near-death experiences. And they begin to, there's certain basic elements which appear in all of them, and some that appear that aren't in any others, and so on. But beginning with the basic elements, there's a number of things affirmed. And one of the things affirmed is that our loved ones are returned to an ideal age. When we see them in the next world, they're youthful. Not teenagers, but youthful, young at the peak of their, before you start going downhill. And it maintains like that. So that's there. And there's hints from Abdu'l-Baha in that area too, that the soul is revitalized and made young again in the next world. And the event of the experience of the account of everything that happens, variations on that. One of the variations is that as you go through the life review, you're not thinking it up, it's coming at you, It's playing for you, so to speak. All what's been recorded about your experience. Some of them say that in the process of that, you're made to feel the hurt that you cause any other soul as you're going through that experience, which completely cleanses you, so to speak, of any illusions that you'd never hurt anybody or you never offended anybody. But the people who have converted into objects into beings that express love and have transcended these negative, dark feelings that are part of our animal nature, which we need to get over. They don't have that. And likewise, there's a book, I think it's been written by a Baha'i who's done a lot of study of the teachings and the near-death experience. I think it's called Light After Life or something like that. I've forgotten the title of it. It's a smaller book. And a lot of Dr. Hatcher's books, I think, are, he has elements of that, examines that himself. I don't know if you've read any of them. John Hatcher's, the spiritual meaning of physical reality type themes. He's quite thinking about that all the time. I think all of that helps. What you're saying is it creates a wonder in us. We can't know completely, and we're not supposed to know completely. But we do need to know. We try to face the right direction. Seize thy chance, for it will come to thee no more. We have a certain amount of possibilities, opportunities, and if we ignore them, we really. One of the, maybe it's a silly image, but I think of everything good that we do. If we're assisted to do good things, it's from the power of God that's helping us. That fills us with our tanks with rocket fuel. The more rocket fuel we have, the higher we can reach before we enter orbit. And if we just have a little bit of it, we get to a level which we may not sustain and may crash, or we may just be able to go around the Earth, whereas the people who've loaded up terrific gains, spiritual gains, will be able to enter an orbit in which they orbit the sun. The whole solar system will be part. I don't know. That's some of the nonsense I think myself. Save your fuel.
All right. There's still some refreshments. If you're interested in doing some time for service, Eileen has a computer there. We can take your name. But thank you everybody for coming.